How I came to be standing in a clearing in the middle of the woods in New Hampshire at 4 o'clock in the morning is rather simple. I was at an artist colony, and I was looking for an artist with whom to colonize. I was in the final days of a month-long residency, tiptoeing through the very same woods Thornton Wilder, Aaron Copland, and Leonard Bernstein tiptoed through. But I was doing it at 4 in the morning, and I was doing it because of a boy. I could hear Willa Cather and Wendy Wasserstein hissing from the ether. Slut! James Baldwin, on the other hand, was like, get it. I'd been wearing the same boots for 29 days. I hadn't known precisely how to pack for a month away, and a month away in the woods at that. What transitions ably from day to night, from cocktail party to bear attack? What could be easily pried from the talons of a goshawk, or worse, someone who wants to talk about their agent? And most importantly, what could project a rustic, down-to-fuck energy, should I need to summon someone? At any given time, there would be 25 world-class artists around me, and I thought maybe I'd meet my husband, or at least make out with someone who'd been to the Sudan on a grant. So I packed nice underwear, my favorite cardigan, and 2 of every toiletry, a Neutrogena Noah's Ark. The town for which I was headed inspired Grover's Corners and would most likely be well stocked with folksy profundities, but not my Pantene Pro V Women of Color conditioner. The other residents were even more impressive than I'd hoped, and I immediately set out to scrutinize their friendly behavior for any signs of gay life. His gait is a little prissy. He really made a scrumptious meal out of that word. Is that a cowl neck on that sweater? You know, mating by McCarthyism. One after the other, though, they all turned out to be merely flamboyant, worldly straight men. I positively ached for a photographer who was such an authority on his own work and soul that I nearly ate my hand. I played ping pong with a Gyllenhaal-eyed architect who kept bringing up his wife, perhaps because I moaned with each volley. I talked for an hour about boats with a filmmaker who looked like Ronan Farrow, only to have him then talk about sailing and wanted them to visit his girlfriend in Europe, with whom up until that point he'd had only an online relationship. You know, he might have been gay and just trying to fend me off. My dream of being fisted by a MacArthur genius threatened to be just that, a dream. I thought, maybe you should calm down and value this time. Everyone's here to be really serious and get serious work done. This isn't Club Med. This isn't 28 Stellas concurrently getting their grooves back. But no, people fucked. Hands would linger on corduroyed knees around the fireplace. People started wearing lipstick to dinner. Those who were usually loud and boisterous were now quiet, listening attentively at someone's side. People who never came to breakfast would come to breakfast. I gave up and told myself that if I was to gain anything from a month in the woods, I'd have to starve myself of the usual distractions, namely Facebook, Twitter, and porn. I removed everything from my phone, reducing it to, well, a phone. I sat day after day in my studio, staring alternately at the computer screen and out the window. I listened to entire albums. I dared myself to eat the piece of fruit that came with each lunch. I read about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I masturbated in front of spiders. It snowed, and I watched it. I began unabashedly talking to myself, and talking to myself as if I were a child. What do you want to do today? Before we leave, do you have everything? Which quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive marriage with myself. Do you want to maybe take your dishes to the sink? I waited for hours hours on the station platforms of my mind for trains of thought to pull in. But few did. The solitude unnerved me. Without social media, I felt like I was a tree falling unheard in the woods. Was my life even happening with no one to like it? I started taking walks around the colony grounds, which admittedly were stunning, and I had to leave my phone in my studio because the urge to photograph everything stunned me further. The experience has been replaced by the experience of people knowing we have had the experience. The picture is now secondary to the frame. Halfway through my residency, an actual gay person arrived. And that night, the sun set in deep mauves in celebration. I stared at his back during dinner. He was broad, femmy, and lean. A short story writer from Miami. He had arms that clanged with bracelets, eyes that wintered behind dark sunglasses, and a neck that hosted a symposium of scarves. He rarely smiled. He knitted during people's readings and showings. He spoke in curt, uptalky half sentences.
My boyfriend is in advertising?
He told me.
He works for a gossip magazine. It's called People.
I'm familiar with it, I said.
We're in an open relationship?
He said, which to be fair is how I've heard anyone in that scenario say it. I immediately wrote him off as affected and dull, and he didn't seem the least bit charmed by me either. He would walk through the woods wearing tight pink pants and noise-canceling headphones, edgy and serene, while I skittered along sing-sobbing Sondheim and avoiding any and all low-hanging branches. In case a deer tick was thirsty for type A negative blood. That's not my blood type, I'm just type A negative and I have blood. All the New Yorkers freak out here, one of the groundskeepers told me. One guy left after the first night. He said he couldn't take it. Me? I couldn't take New York. I love it here. I garden naked here. She looked at me and then softened a bit. Go to the amphitheater. It's pretty. You'll like it. I never got used to it. Each night after dinner, I'd run down the snowy, muddy path back to my studio, which was tucked into a thicket of tall trees that looked like anorexic demon arms reaching up to strangle curious birds. The lights of my studio turned each window dark and opaque, and yet I knew from the outside I could be seen clearly. I would frantically draw each curtain, turn off every light, and lay awake, covers to chin. Gone was the late-night noise of my neighborhood, the hiccuping pump of brakes from off-duty buses, the trash can lid being lifted in the alley, the shouted half-sentences floating up from drunk people stumbling into the bodega for provisions. In its place was silence. Silence, and only every now and then a whisper of wind or the creak of an eave under the snow's weight, or this silence. It felt not like the absence, but the presence of something. I felt seen. It was so quiet, it felt loud. Like that moment between a breath in and a breath out, the woods, their lungs seemed full, as if they were ready at any moment to speak. And then finally, they did. It was my final week at the colony, and my mother called to tell me that my grandmother had died. She told me to finish my residency, that the funeral would happen after. I didn't know what to do, so I went to the amphitheater the groundskeeper had spoken of. It was a fine morning. I trudged through knee and sometimes waist-deep snow and sat on the 100-year-old amphitheater steps and listened to the wind through the jack pine trees. I'd looked up their names to try to, better relate to them, and perhaps touched by my effort, and of course already knowing of my loss, they stood in hardened sympathy. If we have to go, I figured, and we do have to go, the jack pine suddenly hummed. We should all go like she did, quickly with minimal pain and family close by. In her final days, she'd started saying to every doctor, every nurse, every medical professional stopping in to see her, my father was a doctor, my brother was a doctor, my husband was a doctor, And I wanted to be a doctor too, but my father wouldn't let me. This was news to all of us, and she delivered it so matter-of-factly. She harbored no malice or self-pity. She merely wanted it to be known before she went. And now we knew, and now, if you'll forgive me, you know too. 3 days before I left, the colony held its annual gala. Our seating assignments at dinner, we were told, were very deliberate, and I was seated directly behind a pole with the board members' wives. These regal older women and I took a moment to size each other up. They looked at me like they could see where all the dicks had been. So we stuck to 3 safe areas of conversation: grandchildren, the salad, and Broadway. Have you seen Kinky Boots? The impeccably pearled matron to my left asked. I haven't, no, I replied. It's different, she said. Fun, but different. Once the festivities were over, we residents continued to drink. The staff wheeled out cases of extra booze. We'd been drinking cheap wine and Campari for the last month, so we ran for the Belvedere and Woodford Reserve like they were cookies on the moon. Music was turned on and up, and the freer spirits began to dance. One of the composers found me sitting off to the side and, top shelf tipsy, slammed her hands down on the table and said, "If you do not sleep with him tonight, I am going to kill you." She pointed to the short story writer who was dancing in the center of the room. He pulled the bottom of his shirt up behind his head, exposing his torso, and he was all swiveling hips, undulating back, and liquid shoulders and arms. "Sleep with him," the composer shouted. "My ex is Latin, you will not regret it." I mean, I regret it, but you will not. I looked around the table, and the memoirists and sculptors and silkscreeners were all in each other's arms and nodding, "Do it." As if on cue, the short story writer came over, pulled down his shirt, and mopped his brow. "Hi," I said. He turned to me, and in As of This Writing and Tonight, the sexiest moment of my life, said,
Let's go home.
There was no question mark at the end of that sentence. It was a period.
Let me see your studio.
He said as we neared it, and once inside,
Let's go to bed.
he removed his shirt and pants and reclined in jock-strapped repose. I stripped to my Chicago the Musical nightshirt. And slid in next to him. At long last, I thought, my woodsy colony mate, my rustic fuck. I nuzzled his shoulder, sparky and ignitable like the dry timber outside. He looked at the ceiling.
I'm having a hard time with my story.
He suddenly said. Oh, I replied, sojourning a palm across his stomach. What's it about? His jaw clicked. He was rotating it.
It's about a pedophile.
He finally answered, and then continued.
It's about my dad.
I slowly withdrew my hands from his body. What? As if he were a glass of bourbon knocked over at the benefit, the whole awful story spilled out of him, and I just did my best to keep it from running off of the bed. I couldn't believe he was telling it to me. Holy shit, I kept saying. I'm sorry. Holy shit. The air around us felt electric, the way it can when you're close to real horror. My eyes darted to the window, and outside the trees, a rapt Greek chorus hummed, "The world can be horrible. You cannot make sense of it. You can only absorb it."
Let's go to sleep.
I turned off the light, and in the dark, he pulled me to him. I was hard. I had been hard the whole walk there, and drunk. He was drunk. We were both drunk, and the thought knocked at the screen door at the back of my mind. Do you think we'll still hook up? I put both my hands to his chest. His body was warm, and it was a small bed. I found his mouth with mine, and we kissed.
Turn over.
I did as he said, and he draped his arm around me and again pulled me close. He smelled like musk and dancing to Beyonce, and his jock-strapped cock pressed squarely against my ass. I ground against it, hoping to rouse him.
It's so nice to have somebody to cuddle with. The nights are so lonely.
Yeah, I mumbled, putting a stop to the grinding. Just trying to keep up. I looked around the room and realized that with him there, it was the first time I'd been in this bed and not scared. I know, I said. I've been so, freaked out each night. I took his hand in mine. I think my studio might be haunted or something.
Also, the pickings are so slim on Grindr.
My eyes flipped open bitterly in the dark. Like two balls of white in the solid black panel of a cartoon strip called Are You Fucking Kidding Me? He quickly fell asleep and began to snore bourbon CO2 into my ear. And like that we lay, two spooning slim pickings until morning. 2 afternoons later, I woke from a nap to find him standing at my door. Now, colonists are not allowed to approach each other's studios unless invited, like vampires. But I find blatant misconduct titillating, so I sat up and said, hey. He held a bag from the stationery store in town and a bouquet of fresh flowers from the place with the $20 jams.
I thought we could go to my studio and read together.
Our boots crunched in the snow underfoot on the way to his studio, which overlooked a grand meadow. Inside there were huge windows from which you could gaze out at it.
There's always deer and shit.
He made tea in his electric kettle and we sat by the fireplace. He lit a cigarette. You can't smoke in here, I said, officially the homeschooled girl at the sleepover. He shrugged and blew smoke at the ceiling.
What's your type?
What do you mean?
You know, who's your ideal man?
I don't know. Matt Damon?
Matt Damon's an idiot.
He stood, stretched, and stripped off his shirt and pants. Again, he stood in front of me in his jockstrap. My jaw dropped.
I'm gonna take a shower before dinner. You're welcome to stay if you want.
He closed the bathroom door behind him. I think I'll just see you at dinner, I called through the door.
Okay,
He replied, already in the shower. I grabbed my book, which ironically was The Sense of an Ending, something I've never had, and left. What the fuck, I thought on the walk back to my studio. Why am I only able to assert myself sexually with strangers? I paused on the path. The trees kept mum. On the last night of my residency, I texted him, "Want to come over?" He texted back,
I've already brushed my teeth and I'm naked. Wanna come here?
Well, that seemed pretty clear. And so there I was at 4 a.m, marching fearlessly through the woods, impervious to the snaps of branches and hoots of owls that had previously tortured me. He answered the door in his jockstrap, an article of clothing I now felt stood between us, like a competitive, possessive child from his previous marriage. I resented it. Hi, I said.
I thought we could watch a movie.
I followed him to his bed, in front of which he'd queued up Dangerous Liaisons on one of the colony's televisions. He slid into bed. I stripped to my underwear and climbed in next to him. He handed me the remote.
In case I fall asleep and you want to turn it off.
We started to watch the movie. Put that remote on the night table and grab something else, I screamed internally at myself. He yawned. He's yawning, you idiot. Do something. Put a hand on his stomach. Put your head on his shoulder. Lean in and kiss him. I stared at the screen, watching Glenn Close conspire with John Malkovich, and felt my heart race. Reach for him. I couldn't. I turned off the movie and the lights and flopped down in the bed next to him. He rolled over, his back now to me. What had he wanted from me? Certainly not sex. He was a gorgeous, talented writer. I'm sure he had plenty of sex. Maybe what he did not have plenty of were people to confide in, people to feel close to. Could it have been that he felt close to me? I sat up and looked out at the meadow. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Finally, on the station platform of my mind, a lone train rolled in, a cargo train carrying the memory of my first time, and I boarded it. At a sleepover at his mother's house, my very first boyfriend and I undressed and fumbled through what felt like a checklist of steps, as if a lost virginity were a piece of IKEA furniture we were assembling together. He put Vaseline on a condom and was painfully inside of me for no more than 30 seconds when he ran out of the room and vomited in the hallway. I lay there, startled and confused while he cleaned it and himself up. When he came back into the room, he sat on the bed and told me he was having flashbacks to being molested as a child and couldn't continue, nor could he be near me. He slept on the bed and I slept on the floor. I broke up with him the next day, and for years after, I resented him deeply, not really considering or grappling with the immensity of his hurt. He has since moved on and found happiness and peace and lovers. "I'm truly sorry you can't do the same," he said to me in an instant message fight I started with him years later. I looked at the writer next to me. Reach for him. I shook my head. He'd wanted to feel closer to someone through not sex for once, and I couldn't take away his hurt, but I could at least give him that. Hopefully there would be others to try to reach for in the night. I found my shirt and my pants and my socks and my shoes. I took one last look at him, sleeping, a moonlit statue of a man, and left. Out in the clearing, there was an ethereal brightness, a lustrous mist all around. My footsteps could not have made a sound if I tried. A skunk materialized ahead of me on the path, and we both stopped and stared at each other. An armistice. Finally, it continued on, and a moment later, so did I. The trees, who had earlier hummed, "The world can be horrible, you cannot make sense of it, you can only absorb it," now continued, "But if you try like we do, your exhale can be cleaner than your inhale." And back to my studio I went, to be by myself in the woods, to be myself in the woods, and to ride out another night.